wanted to finish off just by drawing a diagram for you. I know this is a lot to digest, having to look at the soil pits and the eco-site classification stuff, but I thought maybe if I drew something for you that it might help summarize what we were looking at today. And so at the top slope, which we classified as a BP2 eco-site, we had two horizons. One was an AH, and I probably would put an E there, and then the second one is a C horizon. And because there's been very little development here, this would be a regosol, and that's what we have up at the top of the slope. And as we walk down the slope, we started to see this real development of an AH horizon, which was 10 centimeters. We had a BM horizon, so this is 10, so this is about 50, and then a C horizon, which we'll call a C1, at about 70, and then below that we had a C2, which was that difference in texture where it was much coarse, a coarse sand, a fine sand, and a loamy sand. And at the upper slope it was a fine sand and a fine sand. And this eco-site here was a BP3, so you have a little bit more vegetation, a little more diversity, species richness, and we still all have jack pine trees. Jack pines, all keep their cones, and this was a jack pine as well, kind of a scraggly looking tree, not my favorite actually to paint, but and so this is what we've seen here for this Catena sequence. We have this very little soil development on the top. It probably has to do with less moisture going through the soil profile. And down here at the bottom, we probably have more moisture going through, getting some more soil development. But the interesting thing is, how does this AH develop? And because we're at the fringe of the boreal forest, my guess is at one time this might have been grassland. I mean, it's not quite sure, but it's a possibility. And that input from organic matter from those grasses would lead to an AH horizon. So we are at the southern fringe of the boreal forest, so it's a plausible explanation, but this is kind of what we classified out, and this would, based on our color, this was an orthic black chernozem. So an orthic regosol at the top, an orthic black chernozem at the bottom, and this kind of summarizes what we were talking about today. So I hope you were able to pick a few things up from these pits today and the vegetation that we looked at, and trying to understand the relationship between the vegetation, the soils, and how that all played out on the landscape.